I'm Hercules, son of Zeus and Alcmene. This story shows my birth under Hera's wrath, and how 12 labors became my path to redemption. Let's begin. Subscribe and like.
Chapter 1. Birth of the Hero.
In an age when gods still walked among mortals, a legend began.
In ancient times, when gods still walked among mortals and heroes performed deeds that echoed through the ages, one was born whose name became a symbol of superhuman strength and unbending will. Hercules, son of Zeus the Thunderer, and the mortal woman Alcmene, came into the world under the sign of both greatness and curse. Hera, the jealous wife of the supreme god, from the infant's first day, burned with unquenchable hatred toward him, seeing in his every breath a reminder of her husband's infidelity.
Hera's jealousy burned from the hero's first breath.
The hero's birth was accompanied by omens that filled all of Hellas with awe. The sky lit up with a strange golden light. Unlike the radiance of sun or moon, the earth shook from subterranean rumblings, and oracles throughout the land uttered dark prophecies that one had been born who would change the course of history. At Delphi, the Pythia fell into ecstasy, crying out the name of the yet unnamed infant. Birds fell silent. Rivers changed their course for several hours, and in temples sacred fires ignited of their own accord.
Omens lit the sky, rivers turned, and fires woke on their own.
Hera sensed the divine power pulsing in the tiny newborn's body, and this filled her heart with such fury that even the Olympian halls trembled from her wrath. Golden columns of the palace cracked, precious vessels shattered, and nectar turned to wormwood from a single glance. She swore by all the sacred waters of the Styx to make Hercules' life a chain of endless sufferings, each day of which would be a reminder of the price of divine origin.
A single glance sent tremors through the halls of heaven.
Still in his cradle, the future hero displayed his supernatural nature. When Hera sent 2 enormous serpents, whose venom was deadly even to the lesser gods, to kill the sleeping Hercules, the little hands clenched around the scaly necks with such force that the reptiles' spines crunched like dry twigs. The serpents expired before they could even spread their hoods. Alcmene, awakening to the sound of childish laughter in combat, found her son playing with the lifeless bodies of death's messengers as though they were ordinary clay toys.
She prayed not only for strength, but for the wisdom he would need to survive his destiny.
That night she understood. Fate had prepared a path for her child full of trials and glory, a path that would lead him either to divinity or to doom. The serpents were merely the first in a long line of enemies he would have to defeat, and Alcmene prayed to all the gods to grant her son not only strength, but also the wisdom to survive what was destined for him. Chapter 2. Path to Greatness. Years flowed slowly, transforming the boy into a youth whose strength grew faster than his wisdom and understanding of the world. Muscles swelled with divine power, bones became stronger than metal, but his heart remained human, subject to anger, passions, and doubts. Already in childhood appeared the first signs that a gift could become a curse. Hercules accidentally killed his music teacher Linus, striking him with a lyre in a fit of irritation over a poorly played note. The blow was light by the child's standards, but deadly for an ordinary human. This tragedy became the first lesson in fate's cruelty. The strength granted by the gods was a curse no less than a blessing. Every movement required constant control. Every gesture could be lethal to those he loved. Hercules learned to walk carefully, embrace gently, play restrainedly, but the burden of constant self-limitation lay heavy on his young soul. The centaur Chiron, wisest of his ancient race, took upon himself the difficult task of training the young hero. He taught him to wield bow and arrows, sword and spear, club and shield, but most importantly, tried to instill understanding of responsibility for the granted strength. The centaur's cave in the Pelion Mountains became a second home for Hercules, a place where he could be himself without fearing he might harm those around him with his irrepressible might. Chiron told him of heroes of the past, of their great exploits and tragic mistakes, hoping these stories would become a guiding star for his student. Tales of Perseus and Medusa, of Theseus and the Minotaur, of Jason and the Argonauts. All these narratives were meant to teach the youth that true strength lies not in muscles, but in nobility of heart and clarity of mind. Having matured, Hercules married Megara, beautiful daughter of the Theban king Creon, and it seemed happiness had finally graced him with its golden wings. The wedding was magnificent. The entire city celebrated for 9 days, glorifying the union of the greatest hero and the royal daughter. Streets were decorated with garlands of roses and laurel, Thanksgiving hymns resounded in temples, and common people felt they were part of something truly great. Megara was not merely beautiful. She possessed rare wisdom and kindness of heart. She saw in her husband not only legendary strength and glory, but also that deep tenderness and vulnerability he hid beneath the armor of apparent fearlessness. 3 sons were born from this blessed union, Thermachus, Creontiades, and Deacon, each inheriting his father's strength combined with his mother's wisdom. Each day of family life was for Hercules an island of serene peace amid an ocean of trials destined for him. He taught his sons archery, told them of his wanderings, played with them in the palace garden, and in these moments the great hero transformed into an ordinary loving father, forgetting his divine nature and earthly glory. Chapter 3. Divine Madness. But Hera did not forget and did not forgive. She watched her stepson's happiness with growing irritation, planning her most terrible blow. The goddess understood. To truly break Hercules, it was not enough to send monsters or create obstacles. She needed to deprive him of what he valued most, to destroy the very essence of his humanity. She waited for the right moment, studying his habits and weaknesses, watching how he flourished in family happiness. And when Hercules reached full maturity, when his strength became truly legendary, and his name thundered from Colchis to the Pillars of Hercules, the goddess struck her devastating blow. Madness came suddenly, like a summer storm amid clear skies. The hero's mind clouded, reality distorted beyond recognition, and familiar and beloved faces transformed into masks of mortal enemies. In a fit of divine madness, Hercules committed the irreparable. Hands created to protect the innocent and punish villains turned against his own blood. The house where children's laughter recently rang filled with screams of horror, and then, dead, all-consuming silence. When the fog of madness cleared from his eyes, when consciousness returned to him, Hercules stood amid the ruins of his happiness, among the bodies of those dearer to him than his own life. The grief that seized the greatest of heroes was immeasurable and all-consuming. He tore his clothes to the last shreds, scratched his face and chest till they bled, cried out to the heavens with such inhuman force that the echo of his screams reached the very halls of Olympus, making the gods shudder with horror. Even stones wept seeing his suffering, and birds flew away, unable to bear the sounds of this pain. The gods kept silent. Only the wind stirred the cypress leaves as if nature itself mourned with him for the dead. Hercules understood. This was Hera's sophisticated revenge, but knowledge of the cause did not ease the unbearable pain. He felt guilty, and he alone, for it was his hands that committed this terrible deed, his strength that became the instrument of destruction of everything dear to him. On this terrible day, the greatest hero of Hellas broke, transformed into an ordinary man, crushed by the unbearable weight of his own deeds and the realization that gods could turn any blessing into a curse with a mere wave of the hand. Chapter 4. Ash and Pain. The days after the tragedy merged for Hercules into a single nightmare of endless pain and merciless self-flagellation. He categorically refused food and drink, didn't close his eyes, uttered not a single word, only wandered through the emptied palace like a ghost of himself, like a shadow of former greatness. Servants fled at his appearance, unable to bear the gaze of eyes clouded with grief and madness. News of what happened spread throughout Hellas, with the speed of wildfire, plunging into sacred horror those who recently reverently glorified the name of the greatest hero. The palace, where children's laughter once rang and festival music poured, now plunged into mournful silence. Even the flowers in the gardens withered, as if unable to bloom where such a monstrous deed had occurred. Thebans avoided the royal house, whispering about how gods could turn blessing into curse and the greatest strength into an instrument of irreparable destruction. Finally, when it seemed that complete madness was ready to devour the last remnants of Hercules' reason, Apollo appeared to him, the golden-haired god of light, music, and divine prophecies. His blinding radiance illuminated the palace plunged into the darkness of grief, and his melodious, lyre-like voice sounded like the first ray of sun after the longest and blackest night in human history. Apollo spoke no words of empty comfort. None existed for such all-consuming grief. Instead, he spoke of sacred duty, of the possibility of redemption through suffering, and of that single path that could return to the fallen hero the right to again call himself human. The god's words fell into Hercules' devastated soul like seeds of hope into scorched earth. The Delphic oracle, speaking through Apollo himself through his prophetess Pythia, gave its irrevocable prophecy. Words uttered in sacred ecstasy echoed in Hercules' emptied and petrified heart. He must serve for 12 long years his cousin Eurystheus, the cowardly and envious king of Tyrans, and unquestioningly fulfill any tasks he deemed necessary, however impossible or humiliating they might seem. Only thus, only through absolute humility and uncomplaining service, only through exploits and sufferings, could the innocent blood spilled in a fit of divine madness be redeemed. Only thus could lost honor and the right to live among people be regained, without bearing the mark of a child killer. Chapter 5. Road to Tyrans. The path to Tiryns was long and spiritually agonizing for the fallen hero. Hercules walked on foot along the dusty roads of Hellas, deliberately refusing chariot and retinue, as if each step on sun-baked stones was a necessary part of purifying penance. People recognized him from afar. No one else could be mistaken for this titanic silhouette. But now in their gazes strangely mixed former admiration and new, soul-chilling horror. The great hero became a living reminder of how thin and fragile the line between divine glory and demonic curse, between sacred gift and mortal threat to all living things. Children hid behind mothers' backs, old men made ancient signs, and warriors involuntarily grabbed sword hilts, though they understood the absurdity of attempting resistance against one who strangled monsters with bare hands. Eurystheus met his mighty kinsman with poorly concealed malicious triumph. Cowardly and envious by nature, he had lived his entire inglorious life in the humiliating shadow of Hercules' glory, and now fate's irony provided him a unique opportunity to avenge years of feeling his own insignificance. The king of Tiryns was petty in soul and mercilessly cruel in heart, but he was exactly whom the gods chose, the perfect instrument of punishment for one who once seemed invulnerable to any blows of fate. First, labor, Nemean lion. The first task, pronounced by Eurystheus, sounded like open mockery of the fallen hero's former greatness and glory. The Nemean lion, a monstrous creation spawned by the darkest forces of the underworld, was devastating the area around the sacred city of Nemea, mercilessly devouring people and livestock, leaving not a stone standing of once flourishing and prosperous settlements. The hide of this supernatural beast was completely invulnerable to any weapon forged by human hands. Its claws tore through the strongest armor as if it were woven from silk, and its roar paralyzed even the bravest and most experienced warriors, turning them into helpless victims. Many celebrated heroes tried to defeat the lion, seeking to gain glory as its slayer, but all without exception found inglorious death in its dark mountain lair. Hercules listened to the task in silence, showing not the slightest signs of fear, indignation, or protest. The pain of loss so filled every particle of his being that his own death seemed more like welcome deliverance from unbearable torments than a real threat. He took his mighty bow and quiver with arrows, donned a lion skin obtained in previous victorious campaigns, and silently set out toward the first of 12 formidable trials. The path to cursed Nemea lay through ravaged and devastated fields, villages abandoned by inhabitants where life froze from terror. Everywhere were visible terrible traces of the monster's claws, deep furrows in solid rocks, pitiful remains of human dwellings, sun-bleached bones of those unfortunate who didn't manage or couldn't escape from the beast's fury. Even birds dared not sing in these cursed lands, and the few surviving inhabitants at the sight of the approaching hero fell prostrate on the ground, simultaneously begging for protection and bidding farewell to life, not believing anyone capable of withstanding such an embodiment of death and destruction. The lion's lair was located in a deep cave among sheer cliffs, from where constantly came an ominous roar that made the very earth shudder and even mountain eagles scatter in panic. Hercules stopped at the gaping entrance to this realm of death, and for the first time in long, endless days, felt something other than dull, all-consuming pain of loss. This was not the familiar premonition of great battle, and not the former thirst for glory and recognition. This was a deep desire for redemption through physical suffering, readiness to accept any torment for the ghostly right to again be called human, not a monster in human guise. The battle began with all of Hercules' arrows, shot with unsurpassed accuracy, bouncing off the monster's hide as if from polished steel armor. The lion was truly enormous, larger than any beast Hercules had ever seen in all his campaigns and wanderings. Its mane blazed gold in the sun, and its eyes burned with genuine hellfire, reflecting the depths of Tartarus. When it threw itself at the hero with all its monstrous mass, the earth trembled under the weight of its body, and the air parted with a whistle. A struggle began, the likes of which all human history and heroic deeds had never known. Hercules was forced to fight with bare hands, finally understanding the complete uselessness of any weapon against this spawn of darkness. The hero's muscles strained to absolute limits, bones cracked from inhuman load, but he didn't retreat a single step. In this titanic battle was decided not only the fate of long-suffering Nemea, in it was redeemed the heavy guilt for innocent blood spilled in a fit of divine madness. Each blow of the monster's deadly claws, each drop of blood spilled by the hero, became sacred payment for the crime committed in clouded mind against the very nature of humanity. The struggle continued for many hours. The sun slowly declined toward sunset, painting the harsh cliffs crimson with approaching twilight, when finally Hercules managed to wrap his hands around the lion's powerful neck and begin methodically squeezing, using that very strength which had become the source of his curse. The monster fought with truly inhuman fury and might. Its powerful paws mercilessly tore the hero's back, leaving deep bloody furrows. But the iron grip didn't weaken for a moment. Gradually, the terrible roar became weaker and duller, movements less furious and coordinated, and finally the gigantic body went limp in the victor's steel embrace. Hercules stood long over the lifeless body of the defeated enemy, unable to believe in the reality of his victory over the embodied nightmare. The first of 12 trials was past, but he felt no joy or satisfaction, only bottomless emptiness where once beat the loving heart of a devoted husband and tender father. He removed the hide from the killed monster, using for this its own sharpest claws, and donned it as armor. Henceforth this invulnerable hide of the Nemean lion would become his constant protection from any blows of fate and enemies' weapons. The return to Tiryns was triumphant for the common people and deeply humiliating for Hercules himself. People rejoiced and sang laudatory hymns, seeing the hero in the hide of the legendary Nemean lion. But he himself felt not like a great victor, but like an ordinary convict who had painfully completed only the first day of his indefinite spiritual imprisonment. Eurystheus met him with feigned admiration and false pathos, in the depths of his cowardly soul, terrified by the undeniable fact that even a fallen and spiritually broken hero was still capable of such superhuman deeds inaccessible to ordinary mortals. Chapter 6. Monsters of Swamps and Forests. Second labor, Lernaean Hydra. The second trial didn't keep them waiting long. Eurystheus, encouraged that Hercules was truly ready to execute his orders, prepared an even more dangerous and seemingly impossible task. The Lernaean Hydra, a many-headed monster dwelling in the swamps near the city of Lerna, poisoned the entire area with its breath, turning once fertile lands into a dead wasteland. This spawn of Typhon and Echidna possessed a terrifying feature. In place of each severed head grew 2 new ones, even more malicious and venomous. Many warriors tried to battle the Hydra, but their efforts only worsened the calamity, making the monster stronger. Moreover, The Hydra had one immortal head that couldn't be destroyed by ordinary means. Hercules set out for the swamps of Lerna, accompanied by his nephew Iolaus, a brave and devoted youth who alone wasn't afraid to approach the fallen hero. The path lay through dead lands where grass didn't grow, birds didn't sing, and the air was saturated with poisonous vapors. Even stones here were covered with a strange coating, and water in streams had an ominous greenish tint. The Hydra's lair was in the very heart of the swamps, where dead trees raised their blackened branches to the sky like drowned men's hands. The monster emerged from the depths with a terrible hiss, and Hercules saw before him the embodiment of nightmare itself. 9 heads on long necks writhed in the air, each the size of a human, and deadly poison dripped from their jaws. The battle began fiercely. Hercules cut off heads with his sword, but in place of each immediately grew 2 new ones, and soon he understood that ordinary methods were useless. Then he called Iolaus for help and developed new tactics. While the hero cut off heads, the youth cauterized the wounds with flaming brands, preventing them from healing and spawning new monsters. Gradually, the number of heads decreased, but the last remained, the immortal one. Hercules understood it was impossible to destroy it, but it could be neutralized. He cut off this head and buried it deep underground, piling a huge stone on top. Then he dipped his arrows in the poisonous blood of the defeated Hydra, making them deadly to any living creature. The return to Eurystheus was marred by the king's unexpected decision. He declared this exploit didn't count because Hercules used Iolaus's help. The hero silently accepted this humiliation. What mattered to him was not formal recognition, but inner purification through suffering and service. Third labor, Ceryneian Hind. The third trial led Hercules to wild Arcadia, where in the sacred grove of Artemis, goddess of the hunt, dwelt the Ceryneian hind, a creature of amazing beauty and incredible swiftness. This divine animal had golden antlers sparkling in the sun like jewels and bronze hooves, whose ringing carried throughout the area, and it ran faster than the swiftest wind. The task was to catch the hind alive without causing it the slightest harm, which seemed absolutely impossible for any mortal. Hercules understood this was a trial of a completely different kind, requiring not brute force and uncontrollable fury, but patience, endurance, and subtle understanding of nature. For a whole year he tirelessly pursued the sacred animal through mountains and valleys, forests and plains of all Hellas. The hind never stopped for long, always slipping away at the last moment when the hero was ready to grasp it with his hands. This long chase became for Hercules a time of deep reflection and gradual inner purification. Running after the elusive hind through Hellas's beautiful landscapes, he slowly freed himself from soul-corroding anger and hopeless despair, learned patience and humility before the gods' will. The beauty of nature through which his endless path lay gradually returned to his tormented soul, the ability to feel something light besides dull pain of loss. Finally, on the bank of a distant mountain river, when the graceful hind stopped to quench its thirst, Hercules managed to creep close enough, using all a hunter's skills. With one precise shot from his bow, he pierced its front legs between bone and tendon, immobilizing the sacred animal, but causing it no serious harm. Having caught the Ceryneian hind, he carefully carried it to Eurystheus, but on the way met Artemis herself, accompanied by her nymphs. The goddess of the hunt was terribly angered by the encroachment on her sacred animal. But having carefully listened to Hercules' sincere explanations and seeing his genuine repentance for past sins, mercifully allowed him to complete the task. She healed the hind's wound with her own hands and solemnly prophesied to the hero that his sufferings were not in vain. Through them he would gain true wisdom and genuine strength of spirit that would surpass any physical might. Eurystheus was shocked and frightened, seeing the living Ceryneian hind in his mighty servant's hands. He didn't at all expect even such an impossible task to be within Hercules' power. Envy and fear of the invincible hero grew with each new exploit. But while Hercules was bound by the sacred will of the Delphic oracle, the cowardly king could only devise increasingly sophisticated and dangerous trials. Chapter 7. Trials of Humility. Fourth Labor. Erymanthian Boar. The fourth task sent the hero high into the mountains of Arcadia, where the Erymanthian boar raged, a monstrous wild pig whose insane fury and destructive force knew no limits. The beast methodically devastated mountain villages. Its tusks were longer and sharper than forged swords, and its bristles harder than the strongest bronze. But the main danger lay not in its monstrous physical might, but in its completely mad rage that made it absolutely uncontrollable and unpredictable opponent. Hercules, having studied the beast's habits and terrain features, developed a cunning plan. Instead of direct confrontation with the enraged monster, he patiently drove the boar into deep snow on the highest mountain peak, where it got stuck belly deep and couldn't use its usual speed and maneuverability. Having bound the immobilized beast with strong ropes, the hero hoisted it onto his mighty shoulders and carried it to Tiryns as living proof of completing the task. Hercules' appearance with the living Erymanthian boar on his shoulders plunged the entire city into sacred horror and boundless admiration. Eurystheus was so frightened by the sight of the monster that in panic he hid in a specially prepared bronze vessel, and from there, in a voice trembling with fear, gave further orders. For the first time in a long while, Hercules felt something like moral satisfaction, not from vain glory, but from awareness that his divine strength served to protect common people from deadly threats. On the way to the fifth labor occurred a tragic encounter that nearly cost Hercules his life and brought him new sufferings. Visiting the wise centaur Pholus, the hero carelessly tasted sacred wine intended for the entire tribe of centaurs. The divine aroma of the drink attracted other centaurs, who in wine-induced madness and jealousy of the guest's privilege attacked Hercules, not distinguishing right from wrong. A bloody and senseless battle began, in which many of these ancient and wise creatures perished. The tragedy was multiplied many times by the fact that Hercules' arrows, poisoned with the deadly blood of the Lernaean hydra, made any, even the lightest wound, absolutely fatal to any living creature. In this accidental carnage perished both the hospitable Pholus and the wisest Chiron, the hero's former teacher and mentor. This absurd battle painfully reminded Hercules of the terrible price of his divine strength, and that even in sincere attempts to do good, he could cause irreparable harm to those dear to him. Chiron's death especially shocked him. The teacher accidentally wounded himself with one of the poisoned arrows, and even his divine nature couldn't withstand the Hydra's poison. Fifth labor, Augean stables. The fifth labor awaited the hero in distant Elis, where the mighty king Augeas, son of radiant Helios, kept 3,000 head of divine cattle, gifted to him by the Olympian gods themselves for piety and wise rule. However, in all 30 years of his reign, He never once ordered the huge stables cleaned of accumulated manure. The stench of decay spread from many stades around, poisoning the air and making normal life impossible in the capital's vicinity. Eurystheus, assigning this humiliating task, counted not so much on its technical impossibility as on the moral humiliation of Hellas's greatest hero by such menial work. He hoped to finally break Hercules' spirit by forcing him to perform a simple slave's duties. However, the hero accepted the task without the slightest protest, seeing in it another opportunity to serve suffering people. Hercules carefully studied the terrain and developed a brilliant plan. He altered the natural courses of two mighty rivers, the Alpheus and Peneus, directing their turbulent streams directly through the gigantic stables. The mighty waters in one day washed away all 30 years of manure, cleaning the premises to a shine. When Augeas saw the result, he was ready to generously reward the hero, but then refused to pay upon learning of the compulsion. This deception painfully wounded Hercules, opening his eyes to human ingratitude. Chapter 8. Aerial Enemies and Sea Voyages. Sixth Labor. Stymphalian Birds. The sixth labor brought the hero to the gloomy Lake Stymphalus in Arcadia, where dwelt a huge flock of man-eating birds with bronze beaks, iron claws, and bronze wings. These repulsive creatures mercilessly devoured people and livestock, and they hurled their metal feathers like deadly arrows. A direct attack would be suicide. There were too many birds. Hercules received help from Athena, who gifted him bronze rattles crafted by Hephaestus. The sound of the instruments was so terrible that the birds in panic took flight from their nests. Then the hero began striking them down with poisoned arrows. One after another the Stymphalian birds fell, and the survivors forever left Hellas. Seventh labor, Cretan bull. The seventh task sent Hercules to distant Crete, where a huge bull rampaged, once gifted by Poseidon to King Minos. Minos didn't sacrifice the bull, and the angered god sent madness upon the animal. Hercules battled the bull in honest combat, tamed it, and carried it across the sea to Hellas, amazing all witnesses with the incredible spectacle. Chapter 9. Betrayal. Eighth labor, horses of Diomedes. The eighth labor required a journey to harsh Thrace to King Diomedes, who kept 4 man-eating horses. Hercules freed the horses, but in battle with the Bistonians, his faithful friend Abder perished. The grief of new loss pierced the hero's heart, and he tamed the horses by feeding them the flesh of their own master Diomedes. Ninth labor, belt of Hippolyta. The ninth labor sent Hercules to the lands of the Amazons for their queen Hippolyta's belt. Hippolyta was ready to voluntarily give up the belt, but Hera intervened again, spreading false rumors. As a result, Hercules killed the queen and took the belt, later learning of the goddess's treachery. Yet another innocent soul fell victim to divine vengeance. Chapter 10. To the Edge of the World. Tenth labor, cattle of Geryon. The 10th labor became the most distant to the 3-bodied giant Geryon for his red cattle. The journey to the edge of the world took years, full of adventures. Hercules battled Antaeus in Libya, destroyed Busiris in Egypt, erected the famous pillars. On the island of Erythea, he defeated Geryon and drove off the herds, spending another year on the return journey through all of Europe. Chapter 11. Garden of Immortality. 11th labor, apples of the Hesperides. The 11th labor was the most mystical, obtaining golden apples from the garden of the Hesperides. Hercules found the Titan Atlas, who agreed to bring the apples in exchange for temporary release from bearing the celestial vault. When Atlas returned with the apples, he didn't want to resume the burden, but Hercules outwitted him and took the fruits of immortality. Chapter 12. Descent into the Kingdom of Hades. 12th labor, Cerberus. The 12th and final labor surpassed all others, descent into the kingdom of the dead for Cerberus. Hercules crossed the Styx, appeared before Hades, and received permission to take the guardian of the gates if he could defeat it with bare hands. In a titanic battle with the three-headed dog, the hero conquered death itself, proving that the human spirit is capable of overcoming any boundaries. The return with Cerberus was a triumph. Eurystheus, in horror, ordered the monster immediately returned to Hades. The service was completed, redemption achieved. Hercules transformed from a fallen hero into a symbol of rebirth through suffering. Liberation became a new beginning. 12 years taught the hero wisdom and humility. He no longer sought glory for glory's sake, but served people. Each new exploit was dictated by the desire to help, protect, bring order to chaos. The memory of the dead children remained a pain, but now it directed him toward good. People saw in Hercules a symbol of hope. His story proved the possibility of redeeming any crime through worthy deeds. The gods changed their attitude toward him. Even Hera began to regard him with respect. The hero's path continued through new trials, participation in the Argonaut's voyage, the liberation of Prometheus. Love returned with marriage to Deianira, but fate prepared one final trial. The centaur Nessus, dying, deceitfully gave Deianira poisoned blood as a love potion. The tunic soaked in this blood forever grew into the hero's body, causing unbearable torments. Understanding the inevitability of death, Hercules chose a worthy end. He ascended Mount Oeta, built a funeral pyre, and lay upon it alive. The flame ignited by Zeus's lightning consumed the mortal body, but freed the immortal spirit. Zeus raised his son to Olympus, where he became the god protector of heroes. Transformation into a god completed the spiritual journey from fall to redemption, from death to immortality. On Olympus, Hercules reconciled with Hera and married Hebe. The story of the 12 labors became a sacred legend about the path of spiritual growth through trials. Each labor carried deep symbolic meaning. The lion, taming of brute force; the hydra, battle with regenerating evil; the hind, patience; the boar, curbing rage; the stables, worthy performance of any work; the birds, expelling dark thoughts; the bull, taming passions; the horses, overcoming perverted desires; the belt, honest conquest of power; the cattle, achieving wealth; the apples, deserved immortality; Cerberus, victory over death. Hercules' story became an eternal source of inspiration, proof that the human spirit is capable of rising above any circumstances. The path to true greatness lies not through avoiding trials, but through their worthy overcoming. Each trial, an opportunity to become better; each fall, a chance for rebirth. The hero's name became a symbol of service, not vanity. A true hero is not one who never falls, but one who finds strength to rise and help others. The 12 labors, this is the universal story of the human spirit, its capacity for redemption and transformation through suffering into greatness. In every person lives a potential hero capable of passing their path of trials to genuine greatness of soul. Hercules showed this path, transforming from a fallen mortal into an immortal patron of all who strive toward light through overcoming the darkness of their own weaknesses and mistakes.